this was, I guess, Geoff was is the gentleman that had the question about this process of failing at, going through the failure process of failing, and really kind of talking about the beginning of Act Two, Part One, the solutions phase, where up to the midpoint, and whether that could be the it sort of sounded like what he was asking was, could that be the entirety of the catalyst of change, sort of, which, and you, I'm not sure, I think you and I maybe took his question slightly different, because I think you were telling him that it was, you thought it might be a very important insight that he was having and that he was bringing to it. And I think, at times I've said this, I don't know if I've said it to you, but I think there are times in certain topics where it almost feels to me like I may have more faith, or I believe even stronger in the system and the power of what it does sometimes, I think, than even you do, because I don't know that I saw his question necessarily as being an insight, an important insight, as much as perhaps it was bordering on an aha moment for him, and maybe a misconception or even a problem. So I don't, which is not to say that the question's not, I mean, all questions are good questions, certainly if they lead to better understanding. But again, I think the way I heard his question was kind of about, again, was that the transformation, as he said, this, could the transformation be happening through the process of failing? And then he said something about wanting to inspire people. I don't know if he was sort of saying he wanted to write stories that inspire people to continue to keep trying and persevering and overcoming, and so that's kind of the story that he wants to tell, is just someone who merely keeps hammering away until they're actually just successful. But again, I think if the entirety of the transformation is merely about the process of being, having the perseverance to continue to try the initial logical solution to the point of being successful, if that's kind of what he was saying, what he was asking about, and why it is that I think that again, I think the response that I gave him with regard to Rocky was really maybe a point that he was missing, I think, because it sounded like what he was asking is whether or not, like, you really, do we maybe really not need Act Two, Part Two, right? That I think, it seemed to me like his question was born of a misconception that the entire process of sticking with the logical solution through to the midpoint failure is nothing more than just kind of like, hurdles to overcome that do nothing but like are a time waster to keep the movie from being 45 minutes long. Like, it's a delay tactic to then get them to this point of failure and despair, but then that the clarity is something, and the clarity and the transformation, and which turns to a resolution goal and a reversal, is more like an epiphany that just seems to drop out of the sky, out of whole cloth, as though that initial process didn't contribute to this. Is like, and I think maybe what we're missing there, and what's important to emphasize, is you're really missing a big step if what you're saying is that they're just going to simply just keep trying and keep trying and keep trying at their logical solution until they reach something, and then that's it. They reach this moment, and they've now persevered and come out the other side. I think that again, that may be not a, I mean, none of this is life and death, so it's not appropriate to say it's a dangerous message, but it's certainly perhaps an off-base message. And it, again, if his misconception is that, and I think, again, where maybe you were giving him too much credit, in saying that it was a big insight rather than, that like, no, it's we understand that the personal goal and the resolution goal represent a shift, and so that's why I was saying in Rocky, we've got to remember that when we talk about transformation, it's something that's at a deeper level. It's not merely with regard to solving the primary situation. It's not merely that it's the deeper, richer thematic level of things. It's something that's internal. Something has to shift at a philosophical level and at a deeper level for them to have the insight that they do use in a very practical sense to solve the problem. But it's not as though then it's not like a tool that they pick up and they can find it anywhere on the ground. They pick up, they adjust the problem on the story situation and drop that tool and walk away and go on with their life as they were before. Or is it that everything they're doing nothing of value and nothing of substance, and then suddenly they're just sort of faced, just because they've been. It's not as though the beginning of Act 1 is simply a car ride to strand them in the desert, and now they're there with no tools and no plan of action, and they have the despair is not that I'm just bereft of all ideas and I'm this empty vessel that divine inspiration falls out of the sky and I have this moment of clarity. It's quite the opposite. It's we're talking about, again, the character wave journey, and that it is a journey and that every step of it is essential and is contributing. I mean, the despair is that the logical solution at a very practical level has not addressed the A-story situation, but it's not that all of it hasn't contributed to their internal transformation. And I think that may be where, and again, if his question was sort of rooted in that misconception, and that's why I was trying to emphasize in my response about Rocky, is that, the training is getting him prepared for a fight. Well, no, none of these stories are about what's going on in the A story. That's why I was saying, let's not forget that what we're talking about here is his, what's at stake is his self-esteem, right? I mean, the fact that he wants to be somebody, he needs to come to that realization that he already is somebody. He doesn't see, right, that, what Rocky doesn't see is him taking care of the turtles and him taking care of the dog and him taking care, him connecting as a good man with Adrian, and him walking home the young troubled teen girl, and him, being a good, a good guy in his neighborhood. All of these things that make him a quality individual, a man of heart and compassion. He doesn't give himself any credit for any of that, right? While he is all of those things innately, he's got to come to this realization, and to say, is there something that comes? I think what Rocky's, again, his journey has to be what is really, because it is such a B story heavy story. Is there something in the training that takes him there? In particular, no. The training is giving him, the problem is he's got to change his priority, right? His priority being this outward achievement in boxing, or it's the very first thing that he said when he sees Apollo Creed, right? This is why I've talked about this. To me, it's not a small scene when he talks to the bartender who's making fun of. He uses, I think, even a racial slur. He's like, this guy is a big clown. He's talking about Apollo Creed on TV, and Rocky's upset. He's like, no, this guy took his shot and he did something. And what have you ever done? right? So this is Rocky stating quite clearly. This is what I prize. This guy has, and which is not to say that he's not right at some level, right? But because he does, I mean, clearly Apollo Creed has achieved something important, and Apollo Creed is a guy that comes across as being very, very self-actualized, very realized. He's a very whole, complete human being. Um, but the achievement, that outward boxing achievement, is reflective of something internal, and that's the internal thing that Rocky is lacking, is that, right, is that self, that belief in self, that recognition that I am somebody, and he needs to get to that point. So again, I think that, it's things that are happening. A lot of these things are, again, it is a very B story heavy. They are things that are happening much more on the B story side. It's also significant that, I mean, I suppose if you want to talk about something being sort of significant in the training, we would talk about the steps, right? The very first time we take the journey from the first time he goes out training, and he's training by himself before he has Mickey. He drinks the eggs, and he goes running, and he's exhausted right away, and he comes to the steps, and he lumbers and lumbers and lumbers up the steps, and he's holding his side, and he, and then we have, it's the cliche moment of Rocky. He runs up those steps the last time, and he's raising his hands over his head, and I'm victorious, and da 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 da. And then it's that very next scene after, like, that's, it's not like we go from that triumphant moment in the training straight to the fight. We then go into this little it's a reversal of that energy, right? I'm on top of the world, I'm ready to take this guy on, and then he goes the next thing is, all right, it's the night before the fight, and he has an epiphany moment. But again, it's really an epiphany moment that comes from because, as you've properly identified, nobody has given this guy a shot. Nobody believes in him, including himself. This is the moment that he has this recognition that the only one I do need to impress here is me. I'm not going to win. I mean, nobody cares. The fight from there. I'm not important in this whole thing, as Jurgens says. I'm sure you're going to put on a good show. It really, he's, Mr. Jurgens, the poster's not right. I'm wearing the opposite color trunks. It really doesn't matter, does it? I'm sure you're going to give us a good show. He's telling him, hey, look, you're lucky to be here. Nobody cares. You're not going to win. Jurgens is he knows how Apollo is approaching this whole thing, right? And Jurgens is approaching it the same way. Like, this is some guy that, by tomorrow night when this fight is over, no one's going to remember this clown's name. And so Rocky has to come to that recognition that if I'm going to take anything out of this situation, it's going to be an internal, I've got to be able to look at the man in the mirror. It's going to be something internal. I've got to be able to take something out of this because, again, Apollo Creed is an unclimbable mountain. And I think it takes all parts of, so, again, just like Armageddon is not about having a moment of clarity about blowing up a meteorite, it's about whether or not these guys are good enough, right? All of these things that we're talking about, what these things are really about is the thing about theme. It's not like, John McClane can shoot all the terrorists and then go back to berating his wife about her identity. All right, I shot all the terrorists and we dropped this guy out the window, and now I want you to move back to to be Mrs. McClane again. And it's we understand that it's the thematic level thing is the takeaway. It's really what it's really about, right? What it's really about is. And so that's an important. I think these are important aspects of it. I don't know that we want to leave Geoff or anyone in the class, sort of hanging with the idea that we only need part of that journey. Like, no, the whole thing. I mean, and this is the essence of it, right? It's because it's not even so much the frustration. It's the fact that the mindset has been wrong all along. Right? The despair of not achieving the solution to the primary situation goes hand in hand with the fact that what you don't realize, you the character, what the character doesn't realize, and the audience probably does realize, is that you're heading down the wrong path the whole time. This was a fatally flawed plan for reasons that you can't see because your mind ain't right about it. Or your heart isn't right about it. Or you don't see yourself correctly. Because sometimes, right, the discovery phase is sometimes something very concrete. It could be, you didn't realize that the client was lying, and that's a concrete piece of information. Oftentimes the discovery is that, but just as often, right, the discovery is something I didn't realize all along that I had that strength. I don't. There's nothing wrong with that, and maybe that's what Geoff is talking about. Is he wants his stories to be about where the discovery phase is again reflective on how good you are as a person, or that you've got hidden reserves of strength. Well, but all of this builds towards that, and I think this is exactly what you've been saying all along. Is that it's all been building towards that, right? The reason that the logical solution fails for the most part isn't the primary obstacle is there, but why they can't get around the primary obstacle is because they have this wrong-headed approach about it, and it's until they reach the moment that they're open to being able to have those introspective, reflective. It's the shift, right? It's an important part of it. I don't think we want to tell Geoff that you can just sort of do half of it and leave out like the second half because neither half, both halves are important to the entirety of the character wave journey. I mean, it's some of it has to do with introspection, some of it has to do with things that they weren't prepared even to hear, or they didn't in fact factually know. And there's nothing wrong with saying we need all of that in order to have. The epiphany moment doesn't drop out of the sky, just as setups and beginnings don't just drop out of the sky, right? I think that's the point I think that I was trying to make by sort of reframing, like, is there something about the training that gets him there? Well, in particular, I don't know. I mean, again, training is obviously designed to make him better prepared for the fight, but the movie is not about a fight. No more than Armageddon is about blowing up meteors, or Die Hard is about shooting terrorists, or ultimately at the end of the day, right? Luke Skywalker can blow up the Death Star, but the Empire goes on, right? It's much more about him rising to become a Jedi. I don't know. I think that there was a difference there in interpretation of what Geoff's issue